This is completely unacceptable.
I am done.
Before we begin, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. I'm really hoping to break through the magical barrier of 1,000 subscribers. That number holds a special significance for me. Hit that subscribe button. It's just one click. But for me, it's a huge boost of motivation to create my next video. Thank you in advance. All the employees feared the rude millionaire until the waitress threw the restaurant king's plate. "Get out of my sight before I have you fired, you idiot!" the man shouted at the young waitress in front of everyone. And not a single soul in that restaurant moved a finger to defend her. No one ever did. Valentina Cruz was 27 years old, her hands calloused from working since she was 16, and her patience so finely honed it could have been Olympic. She had been serving tables at La Cúpula Dorada, the most luxurious restaurant in the Polanco neighborhood in the heart of Mexico City, for 4 years. 4 years of learning to smile when all she wanted to do inside was scream. 4 years of lowering her head to clients who looked at her as if she were part of the furniture, as if people who serve food had no name, no history, no dignity. But there was one client, unlike all the others, one who not only ignored the employees but relished humiliating them. One who turned every visit to the restaurant into a small theater of cruelty where he was always the protagonist and the waiters, the supporting actors who received no applause. His name was Rodrigo Villanueva, and on that Tuesday afternoon, as Valentina arranged the cutlery on table 14, with the precision of someone who had repeated the movement thousands of times, she heard the sound that everyone at La Cúpula Dorada learned to dread from their first day of work. The deep, arrogant purr of a luxury engine stopping in front of the main entrance. The atmosphere changed immediately. It wasn't something visible at first. It was more like a vibration that precedes an earthquake. The maitre d', Don Aurelio Fuentes, a 62-year-old man who had served in the finest European restaurants, stiffened behind his podium. The younger waiters exchanged quick glances, the kind that don't need words to convey a complete message. The pastry chef, Doña Carmen, poked her head out from the kitchen with the expression of someone who had just remembered something unpleasant. Valentina noticed it all. She always noticed. "He's here," Tomas, the 19-year-old waiter working at the station next to hers, murmured. His voice had the dull tone of someone announcing bad news they already expected. "I know," Valentina replied without looking up from the cutlery. "It's your table today." She did look at him then. Tomas was a thin boy with tanned skin and large eyes who studied administration at night and sent money to his family in Oaxaca every 2 weeks. He had only been at the restaurant for 3 months and hadn't yet learned to construct the mask that everyone else wore with such naturalness. "Breathe," Valentina told him in a low voice. "And no matter what he says, don't answer, just nod, just smile, even if he insults you." She didn't respond immediately. She fell silent for a moment, a silence that contained 4 years of bitter swallows. And then she said, "Especially if he insults you." Rodrigo Villanueva entered the restaurant as he would enter a stage, an actor who knows perfectly well that all eyes are on him. 45 years old, dressed in a navy blue Italian wool suit with a silver tie. His hair perfectly slicked back with a product that probably cost more than any employee's weekly salary. His black leather Oxford shoes gleamed with an almost offensive perfection. On his right wrist, a Patek Philippe watch that Valentina recognized because she had once looked up the model online out of curiosity. It cost over 800,000 pesos. Villanueva was the CEO and majority owner of Constructora Villanueva y Asociados, one of the country's most important real estate development companies. He had offices in 3 cities, projects in 5 states, and an ego that seemed to grow in direct proportion to his bank account. He had graced the cover of 3 business magazines that year. In all the photos, he smiled with that calculated smile of someone who knows exactly how he wants others to see him. But Valentina knew what he was really like. She knew because she had seen him every Tuesday for 4 years. Don Aurelio approached to greet him with the deference he reserved only for the highest-tier clients. Rodrigo barely glanced at him, moving towards his usual table, number 8, by the window overlooking the interior garden, the best in the restaurant, as if Don Aurelio were a lamppost, something that exists on the path but to which no one really pays attention. Tomas went towards him with the menu in his hand and his heart in his throat. Valentina watched him from her station, arranging glasses that were already perfectly arranged, pretending not to pay attention while paying all of it. "Good afternoon, Mr. Villanueva. A pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. May I bring you something to start while?" "Where's the water?" Rodrigo interrupted without looking at the boy. His eyes scanned the menu with the bored expression of someone reading something they already know by heart. "I'll bring it right away, sir. Don't make me wait. The water goes on the table before I sit down." "That's not standard here." "Yes, sir." "Excuse me. It's just that he just—" "Don't explain. Bring it." Tomas nodded and walked away quickly. Valentina saw the boy clench his jaw as he walked towards the beverage station. She placed a brief hand on his arm as he passed. "Breathe," she repeated softly. The next few minutes passed with the silent tension of a minefield. Rodrigo ordered his usual dish, a ragu pasta with black truffle, and did so with the cold precision of someone dictating terms in a business meeting. No extra garlic, the pasta al dente, but not too much, the meat portion in exact proportion, the truffle grated at the last minute, not before. Tomas noted everything with millimeter care. He repeated the order to confirm. Rodrigo interrupted him halfway through. "Are you repeating what I told you to impress me? Or do you really not remember anything and need to reread it?" Silence. "Leave," Rodrigo said and returned to his phone. Valentina waited for Tomas to reach the kitchen before approaching table 8 with the small carafe of mineral water the boy had forgotten to bring in his haste. She poured it silently, without making a sound, with the invisible efficiency that only waiters with years of experience acquire. Rodrigo didn't even look up. She didn't expect him to. 25 minutes later, the pasta arrived. Tomas brought it with both hands, carefully, with the mute hope of someone who wishes for everything to go well. He placed it in front of Rodrigo with a smile that clearly took effort to maintain. Rodrigo looked at the plate, studied it for a moment, then looked up at Tomas with an expression Valentina knew by heart, that of someone who has already decided something is wrong before even tasting it. "This is al dente." "Yes, sir, just as you ordered." "Did you taste it?" "I did not, sir." "Then how do you know it's al dente?" Rodrigo's voice rose only a couple of tones, but in a restaurant where everyone pretended not to hear, everyone heard. "You're telling me you're serving me something you didn't verify." "That's how the chef works here, sir." "Don't talk to me about the chef. I'm talking to you." Rodrigo pushed the plate towards the edge of the table with a deliberate, almost theatrical movement. "Take this away. Tell whoever it is to cook it again, and this time make sure it's someone who knows what they're doing." The plate was perfect. Valentina knew because she had personally supervised its departure from the kitchen. The pasta was exactly as it should be. The truffle was fresh. The meat proportion was correct, but that didn't matter. It never mattered. What mattered was that Rodrigo Villanueva needed to prove every Tuesday that he was the only one who was right in any room he occupied. And to prove it, he needed someone to be wrong. And that someone was invariably the nearest waiter. Tomas took the plate back with hands that didn't tremble, only because he squeezed them with all his might. He walked towards the kitchen. Valentina followed him with her gaze until he disappeared behind the swinging door. It was then that she heard it, a sob, brief, cut off, but unmistakable. Valentina dropped what she was holding and went towards the kitchen. Tomas was with his back to her by the sink, his head bowed, his shoulders hunched in that particular way they hunch, when someone is trying with all their might not to let anyone know they are crying. She stopped beside him. She said nothing for a moment, just stood there. "I can't," he said in a low voice without turning around. "I can't keep doing this." "You can," Valentina replied. "Every week it's the same. Every week he comes here and does the same thing. And none of us say anything. And the manager smiles, and we endure. And I don't understand why we have to endure this. Val, why?" Valentina didn't answer immediately because the honest answer was complicated, because the honest answer involved medical bills, lease agreements, university tuition, and sick mothers. Because the honest answer was that the world doesn't always reward dignity, and sometimes one has to choose between dignity and rent, and that choice is the cruelest there is. But also because the honest answer included something else, something Valentina had been keeping for 4 years with the same patience a river accumulates water behind a dam. "Because it's not time yet," she finally said with a calm that was not resignation, but something else, something firmer, something with an edge. Tomas looked at her. Then there was something in the tone of her voice that made him turn around. "What do you mean?" Valentina held his gaze for a second. Then she took the plate of pasta from the counter where Tomas had left it. "I'll take this to him," she said, and left the kitchen. Years of silence. There were things Valentina Cruz never talked about at work. Not because she was naturally reserved, although she was, but because some stories weigh too much to carry in plain sight. Stories that, if brought into the open, become fragile, like those old photographs that fade when exposed to light. There are stories that only survive if you keep them deep inside, in a place no one ventures without permission. Valentina's story was one of those. 4 years ago, in a January she remembered with the painful precision with which one remembers months that change a life forever, Valentina Cruz Herrera was a completely different person from the one now serving tables at La Cúpula Dorada. Not physically, because she was still the same. 1.68 meters tall, shoulder-length black hair, hazel eyes inherited from her mother, which her father always said were the most intelligent eyes he had ever seen. Identical on the outside, but on the inside, everything was different. In that January, Valentina was in her 5th semester of a law degree at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. She wasn't just attending. She was the #1 student in her class with a 9.8 average that her professors mentioned with the pride reserved for exceptional cases. She had an academic excellence scholarship that covered 100% of her tuition. She had won 2 national legal argumentation competitions, one against postgraduate students. Dr. Emilio Garza, her constitutional law professor and one of the country's most respected jurists, had told her privately at the end of her 2nd year that if she continued on this path, she would go far. Very far. Her father, Don Ernesto Cruz, repeated it every night at dinner. "My daughter, the lawyer," he'd say with that smile of paternal pride that needed no further words. Don Ernesto was a builder, not of the level of large conglomerates, but of the kind of people who build with their hands and with faith. For 25 years, he had built his small company from the ground up, brick by brick, contract by contract, earning an impeccable reputation in the eastern neighborhoods of the city. Cruz Construcciones had 8 permanent employees, a loyal client base, and the unwavering dream of growing large enough to leave something for his daughter when the time came. That January, Valentina decided to look for a part-time job to cover her personal expenses without asking her father for money. He was already juggling to manage household costs, along with those of his wife, Doña Rebecca, whose health had begun to decline the previous year with a diagnosis that no one in the family dared to speak aloud yet, but which everyone knew. She went into the Golden Dome solely to inquire. She left with a contract. The plan was to work for a year, save enough to cover her final semesters without relying on a scholarship, and graduate. A clean, straightforward plan. Reasonable. The plan lasted 3 months. In April of that same year, Cruz Construcciones collapsed. Not due to negligence, not from mismanagement of debts, not from any of the typical reasons small businesses fail when their owners aren't careful enough. Cruz Construcciones collapsed because someone decided it times collapse, because someone with enough power, enough money, and enough impunity decided that the land on which Don Ernesto had a signed contract to build 120 affordable housing units was far too valuable to be left to a neighborhood contractor. Valentina found out on a Friday afternoon when her father arrived home with the expression of someone who had just been physically struck and hadn't yet processed the pain. He told her everything with that strange calm people adopt when shock hasn't yet allowed the pain to truly set in. The annulled contract, the consortium's lawyers who had found a technicality in a clause, Don Ernesto hadn't reviewed carefully enough because he had always trusted people of their word, because in 25 years, no one had ever wronged him like this. The 8 employees he would have to lay off, the bank loan he had taken out to finance the start of construction, which now, without the contract, became an insurmountable debt. The name of the consortium that took over the land was Constructora Villanueva Indesociados. Valentina knew that same night. She searched the internet, read everything she found, cross-referenced the documents her father showed her with publicly available information, and pieced together the puzzle with the methodical precision of someone trained to argue cases. It was clear. It hadn't been a mistake. It had been a maneuver. Someone with top-tier lawyers had identified a vulnerability in Don Ernesto's contract and exploited it with the coldness of someone crushing an insect. That night, she didn't sleep. The following week, she didn't either. What followed was a downward spiral that Valentina still remembered as a series of silent scenes. Her father trying to refinance the debt and finding doors shut everywhere because Cruz Construcciones' name was already tarnished in the credit circle. The 8 employees laid off with the bare minimum the law required, and the moral debt Don Ernesto carried because of it for the rest of his days. Doña Rebecca's health deteriorating faster, as if her body had decided that this was the moment it was no longer worth holding on. And Valentina at the center of it all, having to choose between law school or her family, the scholarship or the doctor's bills, her future or the present of the people she loved. It wasn't a difficult decision. Decisions made out of love are never difficult. They are painful but not difficult. She abandoned university in May. She converted her part-time job into a full-time one. She began covering her mother's medical expenses, her father's minimal debt, the rent for the house in Itapalapa, where the three of them lived with their economy pared down to the bone. And she saved everything else. She saved the rage, she saved the papers, she saved the evidence she had gathered during those sleepless weeks, printed and organized in a folder that lived at the back of her closet behind a winter box. She also saved something no one would have expected from someone who had just lost everything: patience. Because Valentina Cruz had something Rodrigo Villanueva would never have imagined a waitress could possess. She had a plan. The first Tuesday, Rodrigo Villanueva entered the Golden Dome. After she started working full-time, Valentina almost didn't recognize him. She knew him from photos, magazine articles, business pages she had read until she memorized them, but seeing him in person was different. It was like studying a map for weeks and then stepping onto the terrain for the first time. The scale shifts, the details become real. The weight of reality lands in a way no image can prepare you for. He was taller than she expected, more self-assured, more accustomed to the world bending to his will. She watched him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she lowered her gaze to the glasses she was arranging and continued working. That first time, Rodrigo didn't even see her. She was invisible, like all the restaurant employees. She was part of the scenery, like the candles, the tablecloths, or the decorative plants in the corner. And Valentina understood at that moment something that would later become the cornerstone of her plan. Her invisibility wasn't a weakness. It was her greatest advantage, because when you are invisible, you can see everything without anyone noticing. And Valentina had spent 4 years observing, watching Rodrigo arrive, who he brought with him, what he talked about, which contracts he mentioned over glasses of red wine, which names came up in his phone conversations that he never lowered his voice for, because, of course, waiters don't count. She had noted dates, names, numbers, identified patterns. She had built, brick by brick, just like her father, but with words instead of cement, a file that grew with each passing Tuesday. And as she built it, she endured. She endured the Tuesdays when Rodrigo rejected perfect dishes out of caprice. She endured the times he ignored Don Aurelio as if he were furniture. She endured the veiled and direct insults, those aimed at her and those aimed at her colleagues. Each of those insults was another stone in the dam she had spent years filling with water. But every dam has its limit. And Valentina Cruz, though she still didn't know it that afternoon when she went to find Tomas in the kitchen bathroom and told him she would take Rodrigo's order herself, was about to reach hers. The Tuesday everything changed didn't start any differently than the others. Rodrigo arrived at 2 p.m. with two partners Valentina had never seen before. Men in suits, the kind who don't smile because they believe smiling is a sign of weakness. They sat at table 8. They ordered wine before looking at the menu. They spoke of business with that particular ease of those accustomed to handling figures most people wouldn't write with their own hands. Valentina served a nearby table with her usual discretion. She listened to what she had learned to listen for, and she waited, the final straw. There was a particular kind of silence in the Golden Dome when Rodrigo Villanueva was in a bad mood. It wasn't the calm silence of an elegant restaurant on a peaceful afternoon. It was a tense, almost elastic silence, as if the entire room was holding its breath. The waiters moved more slowly, more carefully, as if the floor were made of glass and any unnecessary noise could unleash something no one wanted to see unleashed. The cooks lowered the volume of their conversations in the kitchen. Even the ambient music, that soft jazz Don Aurelio selected each morning with the seriousness of an orchestra conductor, seemed to shrink a couple of decibels. It was the partners' Tuesday. Rodrigo had arrived at 2 p.m. Sharp, as always, but something about him was different that day. Valentina noticed it the moment he walked through the door. His jaw was tighter than usual, his gestures shorter, his eyes with that particular opacity of someone who has already decided the entire day belongs to them and intends to collect it from whomever. His two companions arrived 5 minutes later, a burly man with a ruddy face and a younger one with rectangular glasses and a suit that was too large. The three settled at table 8 with the natural disposition of those who know the hierarchy. Rodrigo in the center, the other two orbiting around him. Valentina was assigned the tables in the north section that day. Table 8 belonged to Eduardo, a 34-year-old waiter with 6 years of experience, the most seasoned after Don Aurelio, the one who had endured Rodrigo the most times with silent resignation, the kind who has decided that the job is worth more than personal dignity, at least until his children finish high school. Valentina watched him from her station, Eduardo took the order with precision. Rodrigo ordered his usual pasta al ragu with black truffle, but this time with extra conditions. The meat cut differently, the truffle grated with a specific instrument that had to be fetched from the cellar, the wine uncorked 20 minutes earlier. The partners ordered without complications. Eduardo jotted everything down, repeated the order, and retreated, without interruption. The first sign that this Tuesday would be worse. Rodrigo didn't interrupt him because he wasn't even looking at him. His eyes were on his phone with the expression of someone who had just received unwelcome news. Lunch began without incident. The wine arrived at the correct time. The appetizer, a foie gras terrine that Valentina saw leave the kitchen with its usual impeccable presentation, was accepted without comment. The three men spoke of numbers, percentages, a project in Querétaro that Rodrigo wanted to close before the end of the month. Valentina passed by their area 3 times during that period, serving water at adjacent tables, clearing used cutlery, existing in that liminal space between presence and invisibility that good waiters learn to inhabit. She overheard fragments. Enough fragments. Querétaro project, municipal land, public tender in 2 weeks. The name of an official Rodrigo mentioned, with the familiarity of someone who has a person in their pocket. Valentina memorized it all while filling a glass of mineral water at a table 2 away. Then, the pasta arrived. Eduardo served it with the appropriate ceremony. The silver dome lifted with a smooth motion. The plate placed in front of Rodrigo, with the correct orientation, the truffle shavings added at that moment with the specific instrument they had fetched from the cellar. Everything correct, everything in its place. Rodrigo looked at the plate. He looked at it for a full 4 seconds, which in that context felt like 4 minutes. Then he looked up at Eduardo. "How long has this been under the dome?" he asked. "Just long enough to keep it warm, sir. No more than, it's cold." He said it with a calmness that was more threatening than any shout. "The pasta is cold, sir. It just came out of the kitchen. I assure you the temperature. Are you telling me my hands lie?" Rodrigo raised his fork and touched the side of the plate with the back of it. "You're telling me that what I feel isn't what it is." Eduardo didn't respond. He knew that moment. He knew it. It was the moment when any answer was incorrect. "Take it away," Rodrigo said. The burly partner glanced at his own plate, which he had already started eating, with the discomfort of someone who doesn't know whether to continue or stop. The one with the rectangular glasses studied the tablecloth with sudden fascination. Eduardo took the plate and left. Valentina watched her companion pass with a neutral face, someone from whom she had learned not to let anything settle on the surface. But she knew that face. She knew it because it was the same one she used, and she knew what lay beneath. 12 minutes later, the pasta returned. This time Eduardo brought it with a helper, as if the presence of 2 people could dilute the tension. The dish was presented again. Rodrigo looked at it, smelled it. "Did you put garlic in it?" he asked. "No, sir. Your instructions were very clear." "It smells of garlic, sir. I guarantee you it doesn't. Do you cook?" "Do you work in the kitchen?" "No, sir. Then don't guarantee me what you can't guarantee." Rodrigo pushed the plate away with 2 fingers, a minimal gesture that, however, contained all the contempt in the world. "Take it away and bring me the chef. I want to speak with him." The chef was Mauricio Alcantara, 20 years of career, 3 mentions in the Michelin Guide. A man who never came out to the dining room during service, but who had Rodrigo Villanueva on that short list of exceptions because the manager, Licenciado Hernandez, had asked him in terms that were not exactly a request. Chef Alcantara came out with his apron and his dignity intact. He greeted Rodrigo with a minimal nod and listened to his complaints with the serene expression of someone calculating how much time they had left until retirement. Rodrigo spoke for 4 minutes. He spoke of the non-existent garlic, of the incorrect temperature, of the truffle that was not of the quality he expected, of the standards a restaurant of that level should maintain. He spoke in front of his partners with the satisfaction of someone giving a master class. The partners nodded in silence, like students who weren't entirely sure they agreed, but had no intention of saying so. Chef Alcantara responded with 3 sentences. He said he would prepare the dish personally, that he guaranteed the quality, that Mr. Villanueva would have his pasta in 15 minutes, and he withdrew. Valentina saw him pass on his way to the kitchen. The chef said nothing, but his eyes, when they briefly met hers, said everything. It was during those 15 minutes of waiting that what Valentina did not expect happened. Not because it was unusual for Rodrigo, but because what came next was the detonator she had been waiting 4 years to be found. Rodrigo picked up his wine glass, looked at his partners with the expression of someone resuming control of a conversation they had never really lost, and spoke. He spoke of the Querétaro project, he spoke of the tender, he spoke of the official, and then, with that habit men like him had of using the people around them as examples in their stories, he pointed towards the area where Valentina was working and said, addressing his partners, but with a voice loud enough for anyone within a four-table radius to hear. Look at her, the one with the black hair, the waitress. A pause, a smile. That's how prepared the people who work for the municipality in Querétaro are. That's how capable. That's why it's easy to manage them. You offer them enough, and they do what you want, because deep down they have no other choice. They never had. The partners laughed. A brief, polite, perfunctory laugh. Valentina continued arranging cutlery. Inside, something tensed, something very deep, very old, very tired of enduring. But that still wasn't the last straw. That was still manageable. 4 years of practice had made her an expert at swallowing that kind of poison without it showing on her face. The last straw arrived 10 minutes later. Chef Alcantara's pasta arrived at the table. Rodrigo tasted it. He nodded his head, barely the kind of minimal approval given when one doesn't want to admit something was right from the start. The partners returned to their own dishes, which had been waiting with surgical patience. And then the portly partner, perhaps relaxed by the wine, perhaps trying to make conversation, made the mistake of asking, "Is it always like this here, Rodrigo?" And Rodrigo, who needed very little to find an audience, smiled. "Always," he said. "And I tell you something, that's why I come, because I like to remember that in this world, there's a very clear difference between those who serve and those who are served." He took a sip of wine. "My mother taught me that since I was a child. She used to tell me, Rodrigo, never confuse the people who work for you with your equals. They have their place and you have yours. The waitress who brings you your glass doesn't share your table. The bricklayer who builds your house doesn't sleep in your bed. That's how the world works. And those who don't understand it are because their mothers didn't explain it to them well." Valentina was 1.5 meters away from that table. She heard every word. She heard the mention of mothers, and something inside her, something that had been enduring for 4 years. The weight of all the previous Tuesdays, of all the swallowed humiliations, of all the nights she came home and found her mother connected to a nebulizer in the living room. Of all the medical support application forms she had filled out in tight handwriting because there wasn't enough money for everything, that something broke, not all at once, not with a dramatic crack. It broke the way ice breaks in spring, with a silent crack that runs across the entire surface before the water begins to move. Valentina put down what she was holding. She took a breath and went to the kitchen to get the dish. Rodrigo Villanueva had been deserving for 4 years. The flying dish, the kitchen of the Golden Dome smelled of clarified butter and beef ragu when Valentina pushed open the swinging door and entered with a different step than usual. The cooks looked up. Something in her walk made two of them instinctively stop like animals sensing a change in air temperature before anyone else notices. Chef Alcantara saw her arrive and frowned slightly. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing," Valentina said. Her voice was perfectly calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that has nothing to do with peace, but with the still surface of a lake where something big is moving beneath. "Is Mr. Villanueva's pasta ready?" Eduardo already took it. "I know." Valentina looked ahead for a moment, then looked at the chef. "Is there more?" "There's always more." The chef studied her gaze. "Bal, are you okay?" "Perfectly," she said. "And I mean it. For the first time in 4 years, I was perfectly fine." She left the kitchen without another word. Eduardo was back at his station with the expressionless face people adopt when they don't want anyone to know what they're feeling. Valentina stopped beside him for a moment. "Eduardo, what? When this is over, I want you to remember it wasn't your fault. None of this was ever your fault." He looked at her with an expression somewhere between confusion and something akin to foreboding. "Bal, what are you going to—" But she was already walking towards table 8, her hands empty. That was the first thing anyone would have noticed, that she wasn't carrying anything. No plate, no glass, none of the neutral tools behind which waiters learn to hide. Just her, walking across the dining room of the Golden Dome with a determination that needed no object to make itself felt. Don Aurelio saw her from his podium, and something in his demeanor changed. He took a step forward instinctively as if he wanted to interpose himself, but something in Valentina's eyes stopped him. He had been in that restaurant for 22 years. He had seen many things and recognized when he saw them, the things that can no longer be stopped. Valentina reached table 8. The three men were eating. Rodrigo had received the chef's pasta and accepted it with the quiet condescension of someone unwilling to admit they were wrong. The partners chewed in silence, grateful for the momentary truce. Valentina stopped in front of Rodrigo. He didn't look up immediately. Men like Rodrigo Villanueva don't look up immediately when someone from the service approaches. It's part of the language of power, to make them wait, to make the other exist in the limbo of your attention until you decide to acknowledge them. Valentina waited 1, 2, 3 seconds. Rodrigo looked up with a slightly irritated expression of someone who has been interrupted in something important and met eyes he had never seen that way before. Not because they were different eyes. They were the same hazel eyes as always, the same ones he had ignored for 4 years, just as he ignored all the eyes of all the people who served him food. But there was something in them that afternoon that made something very primal in Rodrigo Villanueva, for the first time slightly alert. "What do you want?" he asked, in his usual tone of impatience. Valentina didn't answer immediately. She let silence occupy its place at the table, that place normally filled by fear or haste or unnecessary apologies. "I want you to repeat," she finally said with absolute calm, "what you just said about mothers." A second of total silence. The partner with the rectangular glasses looked up from his plate. Rodrigo tilted his head with the expression of someone who isn't sure they heard correctly. "Excuse me, what you said a few minutes ago." Valentina didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. There was something in her tone that filled the space without needing volume. That mothers who don't explain to their children their place in the world didn't do their job well. "I want you to repeat it to my face." Rodrigo Villanueva took exactly 2 seconds to recalibrate. In those 2 seconds, he went from surprise to confusion, and then to something he knew much better. The irritation of someone who feels someone below them is raising their voice in ways that are not appropriate. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, and his voice dropped a tone. That specific tone of warning he used in business meetings, when someone started to move outside the boundaries he had drawn. "And I suggest you go back to your place before I have a conversation with your manager." "My mother," Valentina said, as if Rodrigo hadn't spoken, "has been ill for 4 years. She has chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Every month I spend on medication, what you spend on a bottle of wine from that list. I work 12 hours a day to pay those bills. And I swear to you, Mr. Villanueva, that my mother taught me more about the world, about decency, about what it means to be a real person, than you will ever learn in your entire life with all your money." The dining room was in absolute silence, not the tense silence from before, the elastic silence everyone knew, but a different silence. The surprised silence of 30 people holding their breath at the same time because they were witnessing something they never expected to see in that place. Rodrigo stood up from his chair, not suddenly. He stood up with that slow, deliberate movement of someone who wants to communicate with every inch of their body that they are in control. He was 10 centimeters taller than Valentina. He used it. He stood before her with all the architecture of his authority and his money and his years of impunity, and he looked down at her with an expression that was the distilled concentration of all the contempt he had dispensed over 4 years of Tuesdays. "You are a restaurant employee?" he said very slowly, as if explaining something to someone of very low intelligence. "You are nobody. And if you don't leave right now, I assure you that you will not only lose this job, I will make sure you don't find work in any restaurant in this city. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Valentina looked at him. She looked at him like someone looks at something they have been waiting a long time to see face to face, and then she did something no one in that dining room expected. She turned, walked to the adjacent table, where Chef Alcantara's pasta dish, the one he had prepared as a second helping and which no one was going to consume, had been left. He took it with both hands, turned back to Rodrigo, and in the second his eyes fell upon the plate and his brain processed what was about to happen. Valentina Cruz threw it, not with uncontrolled rage, not with the clumsy gesture of someone acting without thought. She threw it with a terrible precision, with the steady arm of someone who had carried heavy trays for 4 years. And the white porcelain plate, with the ragu pasta and black truffle and veal sauce, traveled through the air in a perfect arc, landing on the table in front of Rodrigo Villanueva, exploding against the white linen tablecloth in a burst of broken ceramic, scarlet sauce, tangled spaghetti, and scattered black truffle. The sound of the impact was so clean, so definitive, so absolutely real that it echoed in every corner of the room. The silence that followed lasted precisely 3 seconds. Rodrigo Villanueva stood before the devastated table, splatters of ragu on his silver tie and white shirt, his eyes wider than Valentina had ever seen them. For the first time in 4 years, in his 45 years of life, Rodrigo Villanueva wore an expression that was not part of his usual repertoire: fear. Not the feigned fear of someone playing at being surprised, but real, visceral fear, the kind that grips someone who suddenly doesn't know what's coming next. Valentina looked at him from the other side of the ruined table. The entire room was looking at her, and she spoke. "His name is Rodrigo Villanueva," she said, her voice clear and firm, reaching every corner of the room. "He owns Villanueva Construction and Associates. 4 years ago, he destroyed my father's company with a fraudulent maneuver on a social housing contract in Iztapalapa. 8 families lost their jobs. My family lost everything. And I have been working here, in this restaurant, for 4 years, waiting for this moment." A pause. "Enjoy your meal, Mr. Villanueva." She removed her apron, placed it on the nearest chair, and walked towards the exit with her back perfectly straight. Behind her, someone began to clap. It was a single clap, hesitant at first, like someone unsure if it was appropriate but unable to stop themselves. Then another joined in, and within seconds, without anyone having organized it or decided it, the Golden Dome room was applauding a waitress, walking towards the door with her dignity intact, and 4 years of patience finally rewarded. Valentina didn't turn around. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the afternoon of Mexico City. And at 3 of the tables in the room, 3 cell phones had captured, from different angles, every second of what had just happened. The world turned upside down. The video took 47 minutes to go viral. It wasn't just one, but 3. Recorded from different angles by 3 people who didn't know each other and who had coincidentally been at the Golden Dome that afternoon for entirely different reasons. A middle-aged woman celebrating her wedding anniversary, a young executive waiting for a client who never arrived, and a university student accompanying her grandmother to the only restaurant the lady would agree to go to on her birthday. 3 lives with no apparent connection, who, without coordinating, pointed their phones at the same moment. The first to upload was the young executive's. He posted it on his X account with a single line of text. "What I just saw at the Golden Dome, no words." In 20 minutes, it had 4,000 views. In 40, it had 30,000. Within the first hour, all 3 videos were circulating together, cropped, edited side by side, commented on, reposted, analyzed frame by people who had never set foot in that restaurant and who, nevertheless, felt with that particular intensity that unexpected justice produces, that they had been waiting to see something like this their whole lives. The algorithm did the rest. Valentina didn't know it yet. She walked from the Golden Dome to the Polanco metro station with the steady stride of someone who has just shed a very heavy burden carried for too long. The afternoon air hit her face with that comforting indifference that the city has when one has just done something irreversible. She felt no regret, no fear. She felt, strangely, a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, as if 4 years of wait had finally found their way out. She turned on her phone at the metro. It had 142 notifications. She looked at them for a moment, uncomprehending, then opened the first, then the second, then closed the phone, looked straight ahead, took a breath, and opened it again. Because reality wasn't going to change just because she closed her eyes to it. Her name was everywhere, not her full name, because no one knew it yet. But the waitress, the brave server, the girl with the plate, those phrases were traveling through the networks with the specific speed of things people have long wanted to say and find in another story the way to finally say them. Comments accumulated by the thousands. People sharing their own stories of workplace humiliation, of abusive bosses, of clients who had treated them like objects, of moments when they had wanted to do exactly what Valentina had done and couldn't because rent isn't paid with dignity. "I've worked in service for 12 years and never had the courage," she did. "Crying in the work bathroom, because this is what we all need to see. Who is this woman? Who is she? I need to know." Valentina arrived at her home in Iztapalapa, with her phone ringing incessantly. She entered and found her mother in her usual armchair, the nebulizer on and a telenovela on the screen. Doña Rebecca Cruz was a small woman with white hair and hazel eyes, identical to her daughter's. She had lost 20 kilograms in 4 years of illness, but hadn't lost an ounce of the acuity with which she read the people she loved. She watched her enter, studied her face for 2 seconds. "What did you do?" she asked. Valentina sat on the armchair next to her, rested her head on her shoulder, and told her everything. Doña Rebecca listened without interrupting. When Valentina finished, there was a long silence. Then her mother raised her hand and stroked her hair with the quiet slowness of someone who has learned that some things don't require an immediate answer. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No," Valentina replied. "Then it's okay." At 9 p.m., when Valentina checked her phone again, the videos combined had over 4 million views. The press had begun to stir. 3 online news portals already had articles with the headline, "The Golden Dome," and the name of Rodrigo Villanueva. One of them had already identified who he was. They had searched his public profile, his appearances in business magazines, his gala event photos, and placed them alongside the video of the pasta spread across the white tablecloth, creating the effect that any violent contrast between power and its collapse produces. Mr. Hernandez, the manager of the Golden Dome, called her at 9:15. He was firing her. It was the call Valentina had been waiting for. She listened calmly, responded with correct monosyllables, and hung up. It wasn't a surprise. It was the price, and she had calculated it long before picking up that plate. What she hadn't calculated was what happened the next morning. At 7 a.m. on Wednesday, when Valentina went out to buy milk at the corner store, she found a journalist waiting for her on the sidewalk. By 8 a.m., there were 2 more. By 10 a.m., the street in front of her house in Iztapalapa had 3 television cameras, a radio microphone, and an imprecise number of people with phones, no longer distinguishing between press and the general public. Valentina didn't speak to any of them, but inside, sitting next to her mother who was taking her morning medication, she went to the WhatsApp group of the Golden Dome employees and wrote a message. A brief message. 16 words. "If you want to tell your story, I will support you. You don't have to endure what we endured alone." What followed was something neither side expected. Tomas was the first. He posted on his TikTok account, which had 300 followers, a 3-minute video where he spoke directly to the camera, his eyes slightly moist but his voice firm. "The night Rodrigo made me cry in the kitchen over pasta that was perfect." By afternoon, his video had 800,000 views, and he had 20,000 new followers. Then Eduardo, a long written post on Facebook where he listed, with precise dates and details, 9 episodes of public humiliation over 4 years of serving tables. It was shared 120,000 times in the first 12 hours. Then Doña Carmen, the pastry chef, who was 71 years old and had an Instagram account her granddaughter had opened for her, which she used to post pictures of her cats. She posted a video from her kitchen, wearing her apron, her hardworking hands in the foreground, and spoke for 8 minutes about what it means to work in service for 50 years and be invisible to the people you serve. That video reached 12 million views in 3 days, and Doña Carmen was interviewed on 4 television programs. And then Don Aurelio spoke. Don Aurelio Fuentes, the maitre d' of 62 years, the man who had been at the Golden Dome for 22 years and had never in his entire career spoken publicly about any client. He posted a single photo on his personal profile, a picture of himself in uniform, his back straight, and his usual serene expression. And underneath, he wrote 4 lines. "I have served tables with pride for 22 years. In that time, I learned that dignity is not lost by the work one does. It is lost when one allows others to convince them that they don't have it." Valentina Cruz reminded us of something many of us had forgotten. Thank you. That post was shared 2,300,000 times. Rodrigo Villanueva, meanwhile, had hired a crisis communication firm whose first recommendation was that he say absolutely nothing in public. He followed their advice, but silence in that context was not neutrality. It was fuel. Every hour that passed without his response was another hour in which Valentina's narrative grew unopposed, solidified, becoming the version the world chose to believe because it was the version the world recognized from its own experience. His company issued a generic statement 48 hours later, 3 sentences about respect for all collaborators and commitment to institutional values. The press treated it with the level of credibility it deserved, but there was something else that Rodrigo Villanueva was unaware of. Something Valentina had kept in a folder behind a winter box at the back of her closet in Iztapalapa for exactly 4 years, 3 months, and 17 days. And that something was about to come to light, what Rodrigo didn't know. The folder was navy blue, made of thick cardboard, with its spine reinforced with transparent tape because Valentina had opened and closed it so many times in 4 years that the original had begun to fray. Inside were 143 pages. She had organized them by sections with colored dividers, just as she did in university when preparing a dossier for argumentation competitions. Red section: public documents, notarial deeds, registry records, Iztapalapa municipal bids, the original contract of Cruz Construcciones with the local government, the specific clause that Villanueva's lawyers had exploited. Yellow section: written testimonies. 3 of the 8 former employees of her father who had agreed to sign declarations detailing what they knew about the maneuver. Green section: correspondence. Printed emails obtained through entirely legal means via public information requests, showing communications between a municipal official and a legal representative of Villanueva and Associates Construction, with a very specific chronology. 4 weeks before her father's contract was annulled. It was the orange section, the last one, the one Valentina had taken the longest to build, the legal analysis. 42 pages, first handwritten, then typed. Each word crafted with the precision of a law student with a 9.8 gigapascals, but also polished over 4 years to anticipate every counter-argument, pinpoint every relevant precedent, and forge a line of reasoning that, in her own judgment, was solid enough to support a formal complaint with the anti-corruption prosecutor's office. She wasn't a lawyer. Technically, she hadn't finished her degree. But Dr. Emilio Garza, her former constitutional law professor, was. Valentina had emailed him on Tuesday night, 3 hours after leaving the Golden Dome, before the video went viral, before her name was even whispered anywhere. A brief, direct email, no drama. She explained to a former student who had left her studies due to circumstances beyond her control, that she had a case file she wanted him to review, and that if he found legal grounds to proceed, she would need his guidance. She didn't mention the restaurant, the dish, or Rodrigo Villanueva by name. She simply attached the 143 pages in PDF format. Dr. Garza replied at 2 a.m. Valentina was awake when the message arrived. She sat at the kitchen table, her tea long gone cold, staring at her phone with that peculiar mix of exhaustion and alertness that comes from having done something irreversible. She opened the email. Doctor. Garza wrote in the same no-nonsense tone he used during one-on-one consultations. I've read the entire file. There are grounds. They're more solid than you probably think. We need to talk. You can come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. And then, a final line that Valentina read 3 times. By the way, I saw the video. Good launch. She smiled for the first time all day. What Valentina didn't know, what she discovered that night when she searched Dr. Garza's name online, something she hadn't done in 4 years, as she'd had very few reasons to seek out happy news, was that Dr. Emilio Garza was no longer just a university professor. In the previous 2 years, he had been appointed a federal judge, specializing in corruption and economic fraud cases by the Federal Judiciary Council. Her ex-professor, the man who had told her she would go far, was now one of the judges with the most jurisdiction over precisely the kind of case she had spent 4 years building. The world sometimes has a very specific way of arranging things. Valentina arrived at Dr. Garza's office at 9:55 a.m. She carried the original navy blue folder under her arm and a complete digital copy on a USB drive she'd prepared that morning. She wore the same serious attire she used for university moot court competitions. Black trousers, a white blouse, her hair pulled back, no waitress uniform, no apron, just her. Doctor. Garza greeted her standing, shook her hand firmly, and gestured to the chair in front of his desk. He was a man in his 60s, slender, with completely white hair that contrasted with still dark eyebrows, giving him an expression of permanent, intense attention. On his desk lay the file she had sent the previous night, with numerous notes in red pen in the margins. Sit down, Valentina, he said. We have a lot to talk about. He spoke first, explaining he had read the file with a judge's eye, not a professor's, and found it interesting enough to lose 3 hours of sleep. He pointed out the strengths. The chronology of correspondence between the municipal official and Villanueva's representative was devastatingly clear to any experienced legal operator, showing a coordination that couldn't be explained as coincidence. The testimonies of former Cruz Construcciones employees were consistent with each other and with public documents. The analysis of the contract clause they had exploited, Dr. Garza said, looking at her intently, was extraordinarily precise. Who wrote the legal analysis? He asked. I did, said Valentina. Dr. Garza nodded, as if confirming something he already suspected. He also pointed out the weaknesses. Two of the testimonies needed reinforcement with formal sworn statements. The chain of custody for the printed emails was technically questionable and would need to be certified through official channels. And there was a gap in the evidence chain between the contract's annulment and the direct benefit to Constructora Villanueva, which would need to be closed before filing any formal complaint. All of that can be solved, Doctor, Garza said. None of those problems are insurmountable, but I need you to understand something. Valentina looked at him. This is no longer just your personal case, he said. With the level of public exposure your name has right now, any legal action you take will be scrutinized with a magnifying glass that doesn't normally exist in cases of this type. That has advantages. It's harder to bury the case, but it also has risks. Villanueva's lawyers will look for any procedural crack to delegitimize you before the case even reaches an investigative desk. I understand, said Valentina. Are you sure you want to proceed? She didn't hesitate for a second. I've spent 4 years serving as pasta, she said. Yes, I'm sure. Dr. Garza smiled. It was a brief, almost contained smile, the kind reserved for those who have learned that legal processes require more sobriety than enthusiasm. But it was a real smile. Good, he said. Then let's begin. What neither of them knew yet was that while Valentina was in that office, in an anti-corruption prosecutor's office 4 kilometers away, a career prosecutor named Rodrigo Macias had seen the viral videos the night before. He had recognized the name Constructora Villanueva y Asociados because he had a preliminary file in his archive that someone had opened 2 years ago and which had never gone anywhere due to a lack of sufficient evidence. He had come to work that morning with the specific certainty of someone who feels the moment they've been waiting for has just arrived. He had circled that date on his calendar in red. And at the other end of the city, in his glass and steel office, on the 22nd floor of a Reforma tower, Rodrigo Villanueva hung up the phone after speaking with his lead attorney and looked out the window at the city he had always believed belonged to him. His lawyer had just told him a rumor was circulating about a pending complaint, a complaint based on a case file built over 4 years by a waitress. The tables were turning. The process took 9 months. Valentina knew that from the start. The law doesn't move at the speed of viral videos, it moves at the speed of procedures, notifications, deadlines, hearings scheduled, postponed, and rescheduled with the bureaucratic patience of a machine that recognizes no one's personal urgency. She knew because she had studied it. She knew because Dr. Garza reminded her of it in their first meeting with the clarity of someone who doesn't want anyone to harbor mistaken expectations. Justice exists. He told her that first day. But it's not in a hurry. You can be. It can't. Valentina learned for the second time in her life to be patient, but this time it was different. This time, her patience was neither silent nor solitary. This time, she had company. Prosecutor Rodrigo Macias contacted Dr. Garza 4 days after their initial meeting. The preliminary file he had kept in his archive for 2 years, originally opened by an anonymous tip that never progressed due to a lack of evidentiary support, suddenly became something entirely different when Valentina's 143 pages were added. What had been too faint a shadow to cast, combined with the 4 years of work by a woman who had built her case with the discipline of a law student and the motivation of someone with an unpaid debt to justice, became something an experienced prosecutor immediately recognizes when it's in front of him: a viable case. The formal complaint was filed with the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office 6 weeks after the Tuesday of the dish. The charges were 3: fraud in public bidding, active bribery of the municipal official who had facilitated the annulment of the Cruz Construcciones contract, and intentional patrimonial damage. A municipal official, an assistant director of public works, who had held the same position for 12 years, had clearly miscalculated how long impunity could last when one is careless with emails. He was the first to break. When the prosecutors showed him the chronology of his correspondence with Villanueva's representative, printed on paper, and explained with surgical precision what each exchange meant in terms of criminal liability, the assistant director asked to speak with a lawyer, then another, and then decided that cooperating with the prosecution was more convenient for his personal interests than facing the weight of his actions alone. His statement lasted 4 hours. When he left that room, the case against Rodrigo Villanueva already had legs of its own. Villanueva's lawyers tried everything. They filed appeals that Dr. Garza, now an honorary legal advisor to Valentina, in a gesture he never charged for but she never forgot, had anticipated and countered with such precision that prosecutor Macias looked at him a couple of times with the respectful expression of someone watching someone who knows what they're doing at work. They tried to disqualify the testimonies of the former Cruz Construcciones employees, arguing bias. The investigating judge, reviewing the testimonies, found them to be consistent with the documentary evidence to a degree that made the argument of bias, in his own words, difficult to sustain. They attempted to highlight the minor procedural errors that Dr. Garza had identified from the outset and which had already been rectified. Every door they opened, they found that someone had closed it from the inside in anticipation. That someone, in most cases, had been Valentina. The arraignment hearing took place on a Thursday in October, 9 months and 4 days after the Tuesday of the dish. The federal courtroom was a rectangular room with high ceilings, illuminated by stark, white artificial light that had no intention of being dramatic but produced. In contrast to the solemnity of the moment and almost surgical clarity, Valentina sat in the section designated for complainants, with Dr. Garza to her left and Prosecutor Macias 3 meters ahead, his back to her. Rodrigo Villanueva entered flanked by two of his lawyers. It was the first time Valentina had seen him since that Tuesday in the Golden Dome. The months had been enough for the architecture of his security to change in a way that is only appreciated when one remembers how it was before. It wasn't that he looked bad. It was that he looked diminished. In that specific way, people diminish when the world stops behaving as it always did with them. His suit remained expensive, his hair meticulously styled, yet something in the way he held himself had shifted. It was as if the weight he usually carried aloft, the weight of power, the assurance of impunity, had vanished, and he hadn't yet learned how to walk without it. The charges were read aloud. Rodrigo Villanueva didn't glance at Valentina once during the pronouncement. She, however, watched him the entire time, not with hate. Hate, she discovered, was an emotion that demanded energy, and Valentina had poured all of hers in a different direction for 4 years. She observed him with a quiet, almost detached attentiveness, like one witnessing the inevitable conclusion of something long overdue. The investigating judge declared the proceedings open and set the date for the oral trial. 4 months later, Rodrigo Villanueva was found guilty on all 3 counts. Villanueva and Associates, the construction firm, was placed under judicial intervention, suspending its operations pending restitution for damages. The municipal official, for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence. Rodrigo Villanueva, without any such agreement, was handed down the full penalty: 5 years of actual imprisonment, a lifetime ban from contracting with public entities, and financial restitution that included, among other items, a sum calculated on the updated value of the contract Cruz Construcciones had been unable to fulfill. The courtroom received the reading of the sentence in hushed silence. Outside the courthouse, as Valentina emerged with Dr. Garza and Prosecutor Macias flanking her, cameras were present. Of course, there were cameras. They had followed the proceedings from the outset, with the unwavering dedication of those covering a story of genuine consequence. Valentina paused before the microphones for the first time since that Tuesday of the infamous dish. She spoke for 4 minutes. She didn't speak of vengeance. She didn't speak of personal victory. She spoke of her father's 8 employees who lost their jobs. She spoke of the families who never received the 120 affordable housing units Cruz Construcciones was meant to build. She spoke of all the Tomas, the Eduardo, and the Doña Carmens, who worked with dignity in places where someone was always ready to remind them they were invisible. My father built his company brick by brick over 25 years, she said, her voice steady. He taught me that honest work has value. Today, I demonstrate that he was right. 6 weeks after the sentencing, Valentina Cruz signed the documents that made her the majority shareholder of La Cúpula Dorada. It wasn't magic, it was consequence. The reputational crisis ignited by the videos and the subsequent legal proceedings had severely impacted the restaurant. Its management had ultimately decided that the best recovery strategy was, paradoxically, to bring back the very person who had triggered the crisis. Mr. Hernandez, the manager who had fired her over the phone that fateful night, was no longer employed there. The new investment group that had acquired the majority stake in La Cúpula Dorada during the months of the trial had sought out Valentina with a specific proposal. Her story, her name, and her capabilities were precisely the kind of symbolic capital a restaurant needed to rebuild on a different foundation. Valentina negotiated skillfully, with the precision of someone who had studied legal argumentation for 4 semesters and spent 4 years honing her patience. She negotiated not just her stake but the working conditions for all employees, formal contracts with full benefits, a written protocol for managing abusive customers with the express authority for employees to refuse service when their dignity was at risk, and a scholarship fund for employees wishing to pursue higher education. The day Valentina walked into La Cupola Dorada as a partner, Eduardo was at his station, polishing glasses. Tomas was arranging the cutlery at the tables in the back. Doña Carmen, who had returned after her moment of late and entirely deserved recognition, was overseeing the dessert station with her usual calm. Don Aurelio stood behind his podium, his back straight and his expression serene, as if he had never lost it. When Valentina entered, Don Aurelio did something he hadn't done in 22 years of service, with any customer, any owner, anyone who had ever crossed that threshold. He applauded, alone at first. Then Tomas, then Eduardo, then Doña Carmen, peeking her head out from the kitchen, her apron smudged with chocolate, her eyes shining. The other employees, one by one, joined in. Valentina paused in the center of the dining room. She looked at the tables with their perfectly ironed white tablecloths, the gleaming glasses, the lit candles. Table 8, by the interior garden window, stood empty and immaculately set, as always, waiting for someone who would never sit there again. She thought of her father, who had wept silently at breakfast that morning, then apologized, blaming it on the coffee. The coffee. She thought of her mother, at home with her nebulizer and her telenovelas, her hazel eyes observing everything with an acuity untouched by illness. She thought of 4 years of Tuesdays, of all the times she had lowered her head, of all the words she had swallowed, of all the moments she had chosen patience, because she knew that patience wielded intelligently was justice's most potent form. She breathed and smiled at Don Aurelio. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice as tranquil as ever. "Let's begin."